By early 1944, the German leadership told itself a story that the Red Army was exhausted after years of brutal fighting. Generals at OKH wrote glowing assessments. The Soviets have reached their limit. Their offensives are losing momentum. Others insisted the German Army Group Center, holding Belarus and the surrounding regions, was still strong, well-positioned and capable of resisting any major attack. But the reports from the front lines told a different story. Supplies were thin, reinforcements were non-existent. Panzer divisions existed on paper but had only a handful of operational tanks. Infantry divisions were filled with teenagers, older men, and barely trained conscripts. Yet Hitler refused to weaken any other front to support the East. When a general suggested pulling back to a defensible line, Hitler's response was chilling. We do not retreat. We hold every position, every meter of ground. No exceptions. This no-retreat doctrine would soon turn disaster into catastrophe. By June 1944, the Red Army was preparing something Germany never believed they had the strength to launch. Operation Bagration, one of the greatest offensives in the history of warfare. What followed was a nightmare. On June 22, 1944, the third anniversary of Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, 1.7 million Soviet soldiers, 32,000 artillery guns, and over 5,000 tanks and aircraft erupted across a 600-mile front. The German High Command was blindsided. Intercepted radio messages from Army Group Center spoke of confusion and terror. We are being overrun. Enemy forces everywhere. We need reinforcements, immediate reinforcements. But OKH had none to send. Maps inside Hitler's Wolf's Lair war room filled with red arrows pushing deep into German lines. General Kurt Zeitzler, chief of the Army General Staff, stared in silence at the frontline reports, many sent by officers who would not survive the day. A message from the Fourth Army arrived. Our left flank is gone. Our right flank is collapsing. We cannot hold. The next day, request permission to withdraw. Hitler's response came swiftly. Nitrogen monoxide withdrawal. At OKH headquarters, stunned generals whispered among themselves. He's going to condemn the entire army. This is madness. This is suicide. But Hitler insisted that holding ground was more important than saving lives. While Germany stood still, the Red Army swept forward like a tide. On June 28, the ancient fortress city of Mogilev fell. On June 29, Bobruisk fell after a siege so intense that survivors described bodies piled in the streets. By July 3, Minsk, the central stronghold of Army Group Center, had collapsed. Within just 12 days, the backbone of Germany's eastern war effort had been broken. The German High Command was now forced to confront the truth. An entire army group was dying. Inside the Wolf's Lair, the atmosphere had changed. Gone was Hitler's confidence. Gone were the arrogant predictions of victory. Gone were the speeches of unshakable belief. What remained was anger, disbelief, and the first signs of quiet desperation. General Heinz Guderian, brought back as chief of the General Staff after Zeitzler collapsed from stress and starvation, told Hitler, "The Eastern Front will collapse if we do not move men immediately." Hitler snapped, "There are no reserves. You find them. You make them appear." Guderian replied a rare moment of defiance. "We cannot create divisions out of thin air." Hitler's answer was icy. "Then the East will hold without them." Another general whispered after leaving the room. He has detached himself from reality entirely, but the situation was worse than even they imagined. Reports arrived describing entire divisions destroyed to the last man. The 12th Infantry Division no longer exists. The 337th is gone. The 6th Panzer Division has 12 tanks left. One message simply read, "We have no front line." At OKH, a general spread the casualty report across the table. Another officer stared at it and muttered, "This must be a mistake." This cannot be correct, but it was. Army Group Center had lost between 350,000 and 400,000 men in just the first month. And the Red Army was still advancing. A high-ranking officer wrote privately, "If this continues for another month, we will have no army left in the East." Fear crept into Berlin. For the first time, German High Command understood what their soldiers at the front already knew. The Eastern Front was no longer a battle. It was a collapse. It was late August when the full scale of the disaster became clear. A new casualty assessment from the East arrived at OKH. It estimated that between June and August, the Wehrmacht had lost 300,000 killed or wounded, 450,000 captured, tens of thousands missing, presumed dead. No army in history had ever suffered losses on this scale in such a short time and survived. When the numbers were read aloud in Hitler's Situation Room, silence filled the air. One general lowered his head into his hands, another stared forward, frozen. Guderian reportedly whispered, "The war is lost." Hitler refused to accept the numbers. A lie. These figures are fabricated. Our men are fighting heroically, but his generals knew the truth. One of them responded quietly, "My Führer. We no longer have the men to continue this war." Hitler slammed his fist on the table. "Then we will find more. Call up the Volkssturm. Every man between 16 and 60. But even that would come too late. Later that night, in a private discussion among senior OKH officers, one whispered, "1 million men. 1 million gone. Germany cannot replace them." Another added, "This is the end of our offensive capability. Forever." It was the first time German High Command collectively realized that the Eastern Front would never be stabilized again. The Wehrmacht had been drained to the bone. There would be no rebuilding, no new offensives, no recovery. The summer of 1944 had destroyed the German army. As the scale of the disaster became undeniable, Hitler moved deeper into denial. He blamed traitors. He blamed cowardice. He blamed phantom conspiracies. Everyone except the one person whose decisions caused it all. During one meeting, he shouted, "My orders were not followed. If they had been obeyed, none of this would have happened." A general murmured later, "We followed every order." That was the problem. The truth inside OKH was brutally clear. Hitler's no-retreat ideology had turned an orderly withdrawal into a massacre. By refusing to allow repositioning, he had trapped entire armies in exposed positions. The Red Army struck with overwhelming force, and Germany lost almost everything. A German officer, writing secretly in his diary, captured the mood. "We are watching the slow death of the German army. No reinforcement, no fuel, no ammunition, no hope. But despite their despair, the generals also feared Hitler and the consequences of speaking the truth." One officer whispered, "We cannot tell him. We can only try to delay the inevitable." But the inevitable was already unfolding. By September 1944, the Eastern Front was no longer a front. It was a chaotic line of shattered units, improvised defenses, and retreating survivors. The loss of 800,000 men had done more than destroy divisions. It had destroyed Germany's ability to wage war. The Wehrmacht had lost its last experienced officers, its veteran infantry, its defensive reserves, its mobility. Its strategic options. After the summer of 1944, the German army could only react, never again take the initiative. Hitler had once dreamed of conquering the East. Now he could barely hold the borders of Germany itself. Generals at OKH wrote bleak assessments. "We can no longer prevent the collapse of the Eastern Front. Germany's defeat is now a question of time. Our losses cannot be replaced in this lifetime." The summer of 1944 marked the true end of Nazi Germany's military power. Berlin would not fall for another 8 months. But the war was lost in those 12 brutal weeks when 800,000 men vanished, and the German High Command faced the truth they had feared since 1941. They had awakened a giant they could never defeat. History remembers great battles, great victories, and great defeats. But sometimes, history turns on a single season, a single moment when everything changes forever. For Germany, this summer of 1944 was that moment. 800,000 men lost, entire armies erased, the Eastern Front shattered. The foundations of Nazi rule collapsing beneath the weight of its own delusion. Inside German High Command, they understood what Hitler would not. There would be no victory. There would be no recovery. There would be no future for the Reich they had tried to build. Operation Bagration had done what no Allied bombing raid, no Western invasion, and no propaganda message could do. It broke the Wehrmacht, and with it, it broke the German war machine. The summer of 1944 was the beginning of the end. A season of collapse. A season of reckoning. A season when Germany realized the truth: they had lost the war.